Hello, everyone. Susan LaPerla could not be with us tonight. As you know, she's head of adult programming. So I'm Jane Frazier, and I'm just going to say a couple of words about Earth Day, and I want to thank you all for coming. Shows that you're really concerned about our environment, protecting it, honoring it, not only for us, but for our children. And I read that Earth Day is celebrated in over 192 countries worldwide. And to think that right here in New Canaan, we're doing the same thing. And as Pete Runette said, the people who aren't here are probably out honoring it in some other way today, tonight. So we believe that. We have a great speaker tonight, and here to introduce him is your first selectman, Rob Malossi. Thank you.
Good evening, folks, and happy Earth Week. I go way back with Skip. Skip is a personal friend, and Skip does call me from time to time and say, Rob, I'm going to be at this event. Would you come? And I say, I've got a Board of Finance meeting, or I've got a Town Council meeting. So he calls me a month ago. He says, I'm going to be speaking at the library for Earth Week, and would you come and would you introduce me? And I said, Skip, I knew you were smart because you went to Yale, but I know you're really smart because what politician wouldn't get a chance to be in front of a microphone and talk to his audience? So the truth is I'm not here for that, Skip. I'm here because Skip really does personify what we all come to love about New Canaan. That is a group of passionate folks living in a community that want to impart and share their knowledge and share their affection for what they love with us. And they want to impart some news and impart some thoughts that will let us explore more. And Skip, as I said, really personifies that. I'll give one example, then I'll turn it over to Skip. But yesterday at the Nature Center, we celebrated Earth Week. And Skip was instrumental in coalescing all the different groups in town, all the different environmental friendly groups, the pesticides-free New Canaan and such, the Nature Center folks themselves. And we had a wonderful celebration. As I was getting off the podium, I was stopped by a young man who works at the Nature Center and said, Mr. Malossi, I live in Stamford, Connecticut, and we haven't heard one thing, my kids are in the school system, about Earth Week. And he says, in your town, it's all we're talking about. And I looked and I said, yeah, it's all we're talking about. So Skip, thank you, and thank you for doing this tonight. Thank you for the honor of introducing you. And I did bring you another proclamation for your own records for what I read yesterday. So thank you.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Rob.
Thanks all for coming.
It's a very special occasion for me to be able to share my insight into the environment. And what I want to do today is give you an overview of how the Earth has changed from the perspective of an exploration geologist who also has a passionate concern about the environment. For those who don't know me, I've spent the last 44 years in the oil, gas, and mining exploration business. I've been all over the world. I've seen some of the most magnificent remote places on Earth. I've also seen the most horrific scars, from oil covering mangrove swamps in Indonesia to horrible acid mine wastes in Colombia, the tar sands in Canada. And I think as you see what I have to say this evening, you'll understand why I am so passionate about open space and the environment and the Nature Center here in New Canaan. We have to leave this Earth in a better place than where we found it. As a geologist, I get to see some of the most beautiful places on Earth, and as I just said. And this is typical of the kind of scenery that makes my heart pound, and this is the biosphere at its best. So what is the biosphere? And I guess if I can figure out how to turn this on. Yeah, can you see that little dot there? Okay, the biosphere is the interface between the atmosphere, the Earth, and the water, where all things live. And that is what we will be talking about. I will give a brief history of planet Earth and natural change. I'm going to talk about the anthropogenic impact on the biosphere, past and present, and then I'm going to talk about the future, the importance of sustainability, climate change, what is happening and why, and most importantly, what we can and should do about it. And of course, this is the biosphere at its worst, and you compare that, and hopefully you will share my passion for making this Earth a more beautiful place to live. So in the beginning, our universe was formed about 13.8 billion years ago. This is from the Hubble Space Telescope. Give you a sense of geological time, the Big Bang was about 14 billion years ago, and not much happened for about 7 billion years, and then our solar system formed, and about 4.5 billion years ago the Earth formed, and then it took another couple billion years for life to really develop beyond, the single cell, and then 600 million years later we're down here. On a geological time scale, change is slow. It takes a very, very long time, and that's something that we must appreciate. Now, planet Earth has always changed, and when you hear about people talk about the Earth is changing, the sky is falling, it's always been changing. Climate is not static. So what are the agents of planetary change? Historically, we have had a number of factors that are responsible for the ice ages, the coal ages. Here's our home in the solar system, and these orbits are actually not concentric, they're elliptical. So the distance from the sun as it goes like this, when it's close, it's warm, when it's, it doesn't ever get out beyond the next planet, but it's a little bit eccentric and elliptical. So as you get further away from the sun, it gets a little bit cooler. Solar intensity also changes, and there's an indicator called sunspot indicators. And when you have a lot of sunspots, it's actually a little bit cooler. I talked about the shape of the Earth's orbit. The Earth's axis also tilts. And that goes on all the time. And so each of these factors affects climate. But what we're dealing with today, and that is over a geological time frame of tens of millions to hundreds of millions of years. What we're dealing with today, what I will be discussing in this lecture, is human influence has totally overpowered these historic drivers for climate change. Earth's crust, it's always been moving, and when we were in school, we saw these models of the upwelling and the seafloor spreading and moving apart. The rate at which the Atlantic Ocean is opening is about the rate that your fingernail grows. But multiply that by 1 million years, it adds up. I forgot to say one thing in my introduction here that I will add. Yes, I've been an exploration geologist. I've been in the extractive industries. But I've also been very, very involved in my professional societies. I really don't like Houston. My friend Duncan Chisholm, who just moved from Houston to New Canaan, practiced his career in Houston, Corpus Christi. Now another oil man's in New Canaan. But I recognized that I was not going to the Petroleum Club. I was not going to my local geological society. So I got very active long ago in my professional society. And I had the distinct honor of being elected from 2009 through 2012. I served as the president-elect, the president, and the past president of the American Geosciences Institute. And that is the federation of all the geoscience societies, about 50 of them. We have a headquarters in Washington. We have a staff of about 65 people. But it includes 250,000 earth scientists of every discipline, from atmospheric studies to fossils to museum directors, paleontologists, and it was a tremendous experience for me coming out of the oil industry and the mining industry to be exposed to the people actually doing climate research. And so I speak here with a little bit of, add that perspective. It's just not a geologist who's been in the oil business. It's been somebody who had the honor of serving as the head of our profession nationally and a little bit of international stuff as well. So that's a little diversion. Okay, what's next? Seafloor spreading. The continents have moved about all through time, and you know, we all know this from our school science. It was about 150 million years ago when this guy ran across the landscape of Connecticut. And if you go to Dinosaur State Park on the way to Hartford, you'll see the trackways of these guys. You can actually see one over at the Nature Center. We have a little trackway outside the visitor center there. So, you know, things moved around, but at tens of millions of years scale. Now, things can move more quickly. We have catastrophic events that you've all heard of the meteor that kind of ended the dinosaurs that crashed into the Yucatan area about 60 million years ago. Major volcanic eruptions, the Deccan lava flows in India, covered thousands of square miles, and that led to mass extinctions. So these things happen from time to time, but again, time is measured in thousands of years. On shorter time frame, you have massive volcanic eruptions that, in the case of Tambora in 1815, you had a huge climate impact. For about a 3-year period, there was snow in Boston in August, and it was called the Year Without Summer, global crop failure. The volcanic ash is actually a fraction of, on an annualized basis, of what humans are putting into the atmosphere. There's a myth, oh my goodness, the volcanoes put more stuff in the air. No, it's about 1/100th of what we're adding on an annual basis. But it happens, it puts aerosols in the air, it cools things, but it all settles out in a few years. Earthquakes, we all know about earthquakes. They make big change. But, an individual earthquake comes and goes, but over millions of years, you move California out to sea. The hurricanes, we saw what Sandy did along our coast. Flooding, this was last fall. Colorado experienced some horrific flooding. And I will say shortly after this, the Geological Society of America had its convention in Denver, and there were field trips to look at the debris flow, because these things occur in the geological record. And the flooding created, there were several meters of debris flow that was deposited out in aprons out east of Boulder. And so the geologists were all out there studying this, because we like to see what happens today to understand what we see in millions of years ago in the geological record. Okay, let's talk about recent climate change on a very, very big scale. This was about 18,000 years ago at the height of the last ice age, and you can see ice covered an awful lot of the cap. But let's strip that ice away and look at the land. Sea level dropped about 120 meters, and in feet, that's 394 feet. You can see that Nantucket and George's banks were connected. I have talked to fishermen up in Stonington, Connecticut, who were trawling for scallops on George's banks and trawled up bison bones from that period. You can also see the land bridge between Asia and Alaska, and that's when Paleo-Indians came down here during that period. This was not so long ago. Up until about 8,000 years ago, The British Isles were connected to Europe, and there were all sorts of, humans. People were quite active, when I'll show you 25, 30,000 years ago, humans were roaming here and hunting the places, seeing wildlife. So we have seen in, let's say, the human history, sea level changes of 100 meters. Now that's going down. And mind you, no one really lived on the coast, so when the sea came in, it didn't matter. I show this chart again to just emphasize the geological time scale, and we're down here with 4.5 billion years. Evolution has occurred, but again, on a time scale, the biosphere can adapt, but it takes a long time, and we are upsetting that time scale. How have we done that? I mentioned the cavemen. Europe had rhinoceros, woolly mammoths. We basically wiped them out in the last 10,000, well, probably 6,000 years ago. These guys were wiped out by Paleo-Indians and some of the larger animals, certainly in Europe. The last of the dodos disappeared. The residents of Nantucket did a good job on wiping out the sperm whale. And of course, in the, 1850s, 60s, 70s, the buffalo got in the way of the railroads. So we did a good job on them. So let me talk about, that was some wildlife. But let's talk about the human factor over the last 150 years and what is happening to the surface of our Earth. We enjoy a nice standard of living, and that requires the extraction of natural resources. We have to have food, water, a place to live. We take our modern conveniences for granted, how to get to work, our infrastructure, and of course, this has a huge impact on the landscape, our water resources, our forests, the atmosphere, oceans, and fisheries. Society also creates an awful lot of waste, and this pollutes our air, rivers, and oceans if we're not good custodians. Dig we must for natural resources. This is where the largest molybdenum mine, and that's what goes into steel. That's the Climax mine. I was up there last fall. This is the oil sands up in Canada. A typical hard rock quarry, iron ore mines. Dig we must. If we want to live a comfortable life, we have to have these resources. We need the energy to process those resources, manufacture, and deliver them to us, the end user. We need food. That takes a lot of surface. We need wood to build. Unfortunately, we have huge construction as Asia makes the shift from a rural to a city culture. And of course, all this takes power. Drink we must. The water resources are being strained to the limit right now. And the Ogallala is a major aquifer, and it's just being drawn down. And as a geologist, I am very concerned. That's also in an area where there's a drought. So how is that being recharged? We need to wake up about it. Okay, fossil fuels. Everybody's dumping on fossil fuels these days. I won't say everybody, but the radical, Greens. I'm a Green, and I'm pretty radical sometimes. But I recognize that 80% of our energy comes from fossil fuels, and it isn't going to change anytime soon. We have to make a transition, as I'll be saying. But it isn't going to happen overnight, but we have to start making that transition. This still goes on, unfortunately. We need the wood, but there are other ways to do this. We can be better stewards. I've seen this. I mentioned the mine waste. When I started work, I had a summer job working for the Callahan Silver Mining Company in, I guess it was 1966 when I was a student. And in those days, they processed the silver ore and the Coeur d'Alenes, and they dumped the stuff right in the river. The North Platte of the Coeur d'Alene River was milky white with chemicals. A large part of that was cyanides. It was absolutely sterile. We then woke up. That river is a fishery again, although it's like the Housatonic. You don't eat the fish, but they're there. You know, we need the resources, but we don't need to do this. And I think in America, I'm pleased to say, well, in '65, an environmental impact statement just wasn't on the checklist. I'm pleased to say now my business is doing the due diligence for the financial community in these natural resource investments. There's a checkbox, and a very big checkbox, for environmental impact because of the liability. You know, you do not want to invest in something that ends up being sued by EPA. We've made changes, but our job now is to make sure that the developing world, this does not happen. Will this be our legacy? You know, I cry when I see this kind of site. And I've seen it in the Persian Gulf. I did some work on a little island right on the Iranian Abu Dhabi border, right when the Iranian hostage crisis took place. And I got to tell you, it was scary. There were jets flying back and forth over my head. I went to I was on a drilling rig, and all the radio traffic, oh my God, we're at war. And here I was on a little island that was totally covered in plastic from the ships that went in and out. It still goes on. Fisheries. We all love fish. And if you watch the price of fish at the fish markets, it goes up, up, and up. One of my friends is a professor of oceanography at the University of Rhode Island, and I asked him, will the moratorium on cod fishing make a difference? And he said, Skip, no, because we've depleted the cod stock, and another fish, they're bottom feeders, another fish has moved into their space. The province of Newfoundland had a 10-year moratorium. The fish haven't come back because some other critter moved into their space. We have to wake up. Another thing, the unintended consequences of intensive agriculture. You know, 2% of the nation can feed the world because of our industrial agriculture. But what's happening, and what you don't read in the press, is that, you know, the drainage system of the Mississippi, the breadbasket of America, is where we are spraying our fields with pesticides, with fertilizers. All that washes down the Mississippi, and it's created what's called a dead zone that at the mouth, an anoxic zone where not even the algae grows. Connecticut is 5,000 square miles. This is the long-term average. These are the years. Here is Connecticut's 5,009 square miles. This gets up periodically to 8,000 square miles. Who is talking about this? You know, we all talked about this, and it was tragic. It polluted. But that other one has been going on and getting worse and worse, and no one's talking about it, okay? This was horrific, but that stuff will go away. In a few years, the bacteria will eat it all up. Okay, humans can also change the world instantly, and, you know, we've all feared this. Hopefully it won't happen. Another way we're changing the earth, and mind you, these changes are at a rate where natural evolution can't keep up. So to feed the world, we are stuffing our chickens, our cattle, and our pigs with antibiotics. And of course, this is resulting in germs that cannot be treated with antibiotics. Pretty scary. Globalization. You know, it's very important, and our kids and our grandkids have to deal in this world. It is a global economy. But one of the side effects of globalization is that now, you know, in a matter of days, we can bring the zebra mussel into the Great Lakes, and the zebra mussel has no natural pest here, so it plugs up all the drains. The pine bark beetle is actually native but because of the warming climate, it is not dying in the winter. It has destroyed Colorado. One of the world's great timber resources is up in British Columbia. The pine bark beetle is devastating the forestries of British Columbia right now. In the Everglades, we have the pythons that somehow escaped, and they are eating absolutely everything. Here in Connecticut, the emerald ash borer. This was at the end of my driveway. For those of you who don't know what it's called, it has taken over the sides of the road in the fall. It's called Japanese stilt grass, and it's everywhere in October. It's long and stringy, and it has seeds, and the blowers, you know, that big blower that we're cleaning the streets with blows this stuff everywhere. We just can't keep up. Nature can't keep up with these guys. So here are two things. All this is to say that we're having an impact on Earth. I think we know that. But why did I do that? What did I do? Hang on. Go to, no, next. There we go. 1970s. Pretty amazing, isn't it? All right, dig we must to keep those lights on. So how do we do it in a way that is sustainable? This is what's driving it. I was interviewed yesterday. Rob mentioned at the Nature Center, we had a formal opening of Earth Week, and Channel 12 introduced me or did a little interview on the sidelines, and they said, well, you know, Skip, is Earth Day, this is the 44th celebration of Earth Day. Is it as important today as it was, you know, in 1970? And I said, it's even more important because we now have 7 billion people here. And in my lifetime, from 1947 to the time I die, which will probably, hopefully not be too much before then, the Earth's population will have tripled in one person's lifetime. This is really scary. And these people want a comfortable standard of living. We cannot say to the Nigerian and the Chinese, I'm sorry, you can't live in a nice home, you can't have an automobile, no electricity, no, you know, aluminum cook pots. So how do we deal with this? Here are some statistics. You know, the middle class was maybe 400 million at one time. Now it's going to be 1.2 billion people all wanting automobiles, gasoline, and the metal that is required. The emerging economies, look at what is driving this right now from just, you know, in 10 years as the consumer society explodes. How do we deal with that? We always talk about cutting back the use of coal. This is the EIA's own forecast. Coal is going to continue to meet much of the world's electricity demand. The Chinese are the largest producers of wind energy, but they're also putting a coal-fired 500, 600 megawatt power plant online about every week. We continue. Renewables are important. We have to accelerate that curve and flatten that curve. How do we do it? Here are some of the other minerals when we talk about sustainability and digging big holes in the ground. Look at the increase in lead. This is between now and 2020. 40% increase. Coal, same. Copper, iron, aluminum. Nickel. Nickel goes into making steel. Look at the increase. Those are big holes in the ground. Energy consumption. This is, you know, about half the world's population. How will it move up the curve to be where we are in a way that is gentle with Mother Earth and doesn't forever ruin it? This little chart really worries me because these people want the standard of living that we enjoy and take for granted. So what is our dilemma as concerned citizens living here in New Canaan? You know, we consume a lot. I get kidded, this is my car. I should have come here in a, I'll show you what I should have come in. No, I missed it. But anyway, I have a farm and I need the space. But you know, here's our lovely life, and I truly think about this every single day. What about these people? Not a blade of grass. This is how so many people are living today. So what do we, as concerned citizens, do about that? Are we prepared to make a change? Here, my son Alex could have driven me over here in the rickshaw, but I would have been late. All right, let me talk about the next 100 years. I had the privilege of starting my career in the Amazon jungle. I was the geologist for the road and the pipeline that Texaco built over the Andes to the upper Amazon in Ecuador. I spent 3.5 years there, and it was incredible going to an area where no one else had ever been. Unfortunately, now that there's a road, they're colonists, they've cut the forest down. With the rain, the forest is not productive any longer. It's a tragedy. Energy and climate change. Cheap and abundant fossil fuels have energized America and the rest of the world. We owe our standard of living and our economic might to abundant natural resources. And I don't advocate that we turn our back on that. But we know that there's a price to pay, and the business model has to change for the good of planet Earth. So let me talk about climate change today. Why does it matter? Well, first of all, the biosphere has to be able to adapt to the rate of change. I showed you the geologic time scale. You know, it's had billions of years to adapt. It doesn't have billions of years. We live in it now. Can it adapt in the next 100 years? No. We have to make that change. And the humans, 7 billion of them now, 9 billion by the middle of this century. So we have made a huge impact on Earth, and the consequences are going to be very disruptive and severe if we don't do something about it. Now, there are a lot of people who say, Skip, you're full of baloney. We have natural change. You know, this is not an issue that we need to worry about. My personal view is that, you know, other controversial scientific issues were the Earth is round. You know, you were persecuted for that. Galileo was nearly burned at the stake for saying that the Earth revolves around the sun. In Darwin's day, the thought that man was descended from the apes was heresy. When I was a student in the 60s, continents, you know, my professor, John Rogers, who was one of the fathers of thin-skin tectonics, we called it, was called a jerk by some professor at Oxford for saying there was such a thing as plate tectonics. Now, it's anthropogenic CO2 is causing or accelerating global warming. And I got to tell you, friends, despite what you read on the op-ed page of the Wall Street Journal, the debate is over among the scientists who are dealing with this. And that is what I learned dealing with the people who actually did the work. I interviewed a lady to be the AGI Congressional Fellow, and we support several every year. And she had just come from doing her doctoral dissertation on the ice melt in Greenland. And her work was actually the water melts, and I'll show you a picture of it. It goes down through the fissures underneath the glaciers and lubricates and accelerates them. But it was really interesting to be able to talk to the people doing the work. All right, you've probably seen this curve. You know, in Mauna Loa, there's an observatory. From 1960, we have CO2 in the air has gone up. It's now at 400 parts per million. Why is that important? CO2 is a greenhouse gas, as is methane. What is a greenhouse gas? It absorbs infrared rays, it vibrates, and it heats up. It heats up the atmosphere. It's responsible for a large part, we now know, of the global warming. Okay. We have a record. This is really cool. We've taken ice cores in Antarctica that go back 800,000 years. And this is the graph of parts per million CO2. And you can see G is during the glacial periods. And it might have been 175 parts per million CO2. And that's not very much. It's tiny, okay? And during the interglacial periods, when it's warm, it maybe have gotten up to 275, maybe, here. Now look at it. It's up to 400. People say, well, this is so tiny. What difference does it make? Someone gave me the analogy for the DWI test. You blow into the thing, and it's, what is it, point?
Why are you looking at me?
Oh, because I thought you would know. But, you know, we're talking about parts per million alcohol in your blood, making the difference between being legal and not legal. So this very small difference on the Earth makes a huge difference. Okay, methane. Look at the methane. Boom. Huge. How do we know this? Oh, what are the sources? Okay. Fossil fuel combustion, order of magnitude larger than everything else. And this is, you know, for burning everything for power, for automobiles, whatever is an internal combustion engine spits out exhaust. And the CO2 is coming from that and everything else. Where all this comes from, everything we do. But, you know, we need all this stuff. So how do we deal with it? Okay. There will be a quiz afterwards, so quickly read this. When, you know, okay, it's 400 million right now. When was it like this before? We know that 5 million years ago, between 5 and about 2.5 million years ago, carbon dioxide concentrations were of this level, up to about 400. But during that period, temperatures were 2 to 3 degrees warmer. And the sea levels were probably 10 to 25 meters higher than they are today. We also know that even earlier, say 55 million years ago, we had something called the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. And the temperatures were probably 5 to 9 degrees warmer than they are now. And that lasted over 10,000 years. There was possibly as much as 2,000 parts per million CO2. It was semi-tropical in the Arctic. There was no ice during that thermal maximum. What might have caused it, I have down here, kimberlite eruptions. These bring up diamonds. It's, you do not want to be around when one of these things happens, but it comes from the center of the Earth. There's a volcanic eruption to the surface that's basically bringing mantle material up to the surface. And it will be a volcano bigger than anyone has ever seen in our lifetime. That may have been the cause. And also, when it warms, and I'll have a picture of this, we have something called methane hydrates. Methane is swamp gas. Organic matter rotting generates methane. And you had in the Arctic, when you had warm periods, you had rotting vegetation. It got colder, the ice formed over it, and that stuff rotted and rotted. It could not escape. As it got buried, it's a function of pressure and temperature. The methane forms an ice. It's called a methane hydrate. And there's an awful lot of methane packed in those hydrates. What may have happened when it warmed, you probably, and the change can be almost instantaneous. You probably got to the pressure or temperature point where you had a phase transformation, and you went from the hydrate to a gas phase. And suddenly, all that methane went in the air and caused very, very rapid warming. The warming can occur very, very quickly, as we're now learning. Okay, how do we know? This really is Geology 101 and 102 and 3 for you all. Okay, these little dark things are air bubbles in that ice. I told you we have 800,000 years of core data. We have the ability to actually, with a very fine needle, suck the air out of these bubbles and analyze the CO2 and methane content in those bubbles. Pretty cool. And it's quite accurate. We also know what the temperature is from these little critters. These are the little one-celled creatures that form calcium shell material. And the ratio of oxygen 18 to oxygen 16 is a very, very diagnostic thermometer, geochemical thermometer of temperature. And so we know the atmosphere and we know the temperature very nicely back millions of years. So you've all read recently the IPCC, which is the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. There's no question now that we are warming when you look at it over decades. This has been a cold winter, but it's really been a natural winter because we've had such warm winters. You have to look at things in a 25, 50-year, 100-year trend. There's no question that we're warming. There's no question that the sea level is rising. And it's extremely likely, and this was to make peace with the conservative politicians. We had to say it's extremely likely, not it's absolute, but extremely likely is a 95 to 100% probability. So trust me, we are the cause of it. Interesting, what are the CO2 is causing it, methane's causing it, there are other halocarbons which are refrigerants, nitrogen is causing it, but aerosols are suppressing it. And I just learned at Yale a very interesting, there's research being done there, aerosols. The people who don't believe the Earth is warming have said, oh, well, there were cooling spells from the 1950s to the 1970s. The Earth, we were emitting all the CO2 as everybody started driving and we were, our standard of living went up, power plants. That's true. The temperature did not rise. Well, we now know, the research being done at Yale, that that was the same time all the cars that were spitting, fumes out, and all the power plants up and down the Ohio River were putting aerosols in the air. And the aerosols suppress the temperature increase of the CO2. And when the Clean Air Act went in the 70s, the amount of aerosols started to drop and the temperature started rising again through the 80s and 90s. Now we're seeing a cooling again, and people are saying, oh, well, the Earth isn't warming. Well, it is. What's so elegant about the research being done is the Chinese are all buying cars, and we now have more aerosols in the air, and again, there's a little plateau on that warming trend. But this is the end. All right, I'm going to zip through these things. One of the things I am trying to do in public outreach is stop saying the average temperature increase has only been half a degree, in the last, say, 25 years. You have to look at the global averages. And you look at, this is centigrade, the changes at the pole, the changes at the equator are huge. Stop talking about the average. These are the different climate models, and they, each one has a little number, but you can see changes in precipitation associated. A warmer atmosphere holds more water. That's why the storms are going to be more powerful. But look at the change in average surface temperature up here, and I'll show you Alaska. Here's some anomalies, and the point to make here is that each decade is getting warmer than the previous decade. And in geological time, this is nothing, but we have to live in this, okay? Those who say, oh, the Earth isn't warming, how do they answer this? You look at the melting of the ice cap up here. There's no question it's melting. And Greenland, look at 1992, 2000, and what was that, 2002 or 12? Anyway, it's getting worse. We're seeing, there's no question about the retreat of the glaciers up there. We're having shipping now going through the Arctic, and it's a huge saver. The time it takes to sail from the the port of Baltimore to Tokyo on the traditional route versus going up around, through the Arctic, it saves an awful lot. I can't remember the number, but it's a huge. It's like 2 weeks, and that's expensive savings for a big ship. Look at this: 1941, 2008. Here's something that more people need to see the next couple of slides. Those who say, "Oh, we don't have a warming problem." The permafrost is this. Was this NOAA? We don't need to worry about this. It's just that the numbers are up. But research is being done in the Arctic, and this is the American Geosciences Institute publishes a monthly magazine, which is really great reading. And what's happening with the melting Arctic Sea, you have a larger fetch, with the wind. The wind is now flowing across open water. It's creating waves. The waves are absolutely buffeting the Arctic shores. And this is what's happening. The Wall Street Journal showed you this picture. This is Point Barrow, Alaska. The city's falling in. The telephone poles are falling over. Remember I mentioned methane? This is the methane. It's starting to desorb, and it's lighted here. And what is really scary is the average annual temperature on the north slope of Alaska has risen 6 degrees Fahrenheit, 3.4 degrees centigrade in the past 50 years. The winters have warmed by 11 degrees. This is unheard of. Why aren't we getting the word out? And this is the kind of stuff that, oh my God, what do we do about it? All right, the consequence, sea level rise. You have the melting ice. You also have the warming oceans. And the oceans expand as the temperature goes up. Sea level rise, probably, 20 centimeters in the last, 100 or so years. This is, I guess this is global. We need to look at it locally. This is the projection, and you can see that there's a range of projections, but I like to use the mean. And by 2100, the mean is a little more than half a meter, okay? That's the mean, global sea level. But let's look at it locally. All right, this USGS has been studying the Chesapeake Bay area. Norfolk Naval Base is down here. Norfolk Naval Base water supply is being threatened by incursion of salt water now. The coastal of the eastern shore of Maryland will be underwater very soon. It is happening. Closer to home, Stonington. My family has a house up on the water there, and when my brother and I were little, there was a little beach in front of the house that we'd play at. There's a seawall in front of it. Now, at high tide, the water's against the wall. And in the 50s, we had a little beach. There's no beach. It's about an 8-inch rise just up in the Stonington marshlands. Those salt marshes are going to be underwater in the not-too-distant future. Okay, after Hurricane Sandy, the barrier islands along the coast of North Carolina took a beating. And the state legislature commissioned a group of geoscientists to study sea level rise. And their analysis to the state legislature was that you had a range by 2100 of 15 inches to, 55 inches, with a mean of maybe 30 inches. You've all been to those barrier islands. Can you imagine what a 30-inch rise would do when there's no storm? And then what happens when there's a storm? Well, the interesting thing that happened here is normally legislators like to ask scientists for objective opinions. The state legislature refused to accept this report. They said, this is junk science. We don't believe it. Turns out that a number of them own real estate on the island. And a friend of mine was involved in this and wrote an article about it. He said, at one time, politicians really wanted to hear what the scientists had to say. Now, they don't want to hear what we have to say. This is the USGS forecast of New York City by 2100. I would not want to own this office building. So anyway, what's going to happen? As we warm, the atmosphere can hold more water. What I see, and this is not my area of expertise, but we've seen this past year, the El Nino goes way, way up to Alaska. It's been one of the warmest years in Alaska. I understand the Iditarod was run in mud, yet you had the Arctic gyre. What happens, my personal opinion, this is not scientific, is that the atmospheric and oceanic circulatory patterns are out of equilibrium now. And it doesn't take much. You know, just an ice-free summer changes all the air pressure up there. So you have the Pacific warm air coming up to Alaska. It pushes the Arctic cold air over. The jet stream comes down, brings the cold air down. The warm air comes up the east coast of the states. It pushes the Arctic circulatory patterns east over Siberia. Things rotate clockwise. That rotation was bringing very cold, damp air down to Europe, where it was meeting the Saharan air, and you had catastrophic floods in Europe. This is happening. FEMA and the insurance companies understand this. The flip side of all the additional water is we're having serious, as these weather patterns move around and they oscillate like that, we're having very serious droughts in America and across the Sahel. Brazil, you know, the price of coffee is going up because of Brazil's problems right now. You know, we all are familiar with this picture of desertification in Africa. It's happened here. It's happened here. This was Oklahoma. That was the migration to California. This was last year. This was last year. And you have these dust storms are the same thing that was occurring in the 30s. Wake up, politicians. This was the USGS study on water problems. And mind you, in California, and I just met the state geologist. I'm on a committee with the state geologist in California, and he said they are not going to be able to deliver water to a large number of farmers in California. I mean, the government had just said, no water for you, full stop. It all has to go down to Los Angeles. Very serious. This does not take into account the impact of climate change. And we all saw the fires, and there'll be more fires. Okay, what really changed Skip Hobbs from being an oil guy who said, oh, come on, we don't have a problem. The CO2 will be absorbed by the oceans. We'll absorb and we'll make another layer of limestone. We'll make more coral reefs. That was what I used to think. But then one of the benefits of being the president of the geologists was I was invited to serve on the Council of Scientific Society Presidents, which is the presidents of all the science societies. And we are a consultative organization to Congress and all the government agencies. It was so cool. Dr. Feely is like the chief oceanographer of NOAA, and he presented a talk on ocean acidification. I knew nothing about this. Think about it. CO2 forms carbonic acid. You know, your soda pop is carbonic acid. As the ocean, as CO2 levels go up, the ocean is absorbing more CO2 and the pH goes down. pH is a measure of acidity. pH is going down. And this is happening. I was not aware of it. And the impact is already on the West Coast. This is what, Washington State. I love oysters. And oysters already, the larvae, are measurably not forming their little calcareous shell. You know, it is not a disaster, but you reach a tipping point. And as these acidic waters increase, you suddenly find that the bottom of the food chain, and this, all the little critters, the salmon eat something called a copod or something pod. copepod. They have a little calcareous shell. If that does not form, because that Pacific warm water is moving up into Alaska, our salmon fisheries are gone up there. So this was a real epiphany for me, and I said, oh my goodness, I need to learn more about it. This is the, by 2095, you look at the large areas of the world will be, 7.0 is neutral. But over geological time, this never happened. And we are going to wipe out the bottom of the food chain if we don't do something about CO2. So what do we do about it? What can we do about it? It's all a matter of finding a balance between, we need the resources. I want the standard of living I enjoy. What sacrifices am I and all of you prepared to make to achieve this balance? Political statement. We absolutely have to reduce our carbon footprint. And the one way to do that is through a carbon tax, sticks and carrots. You get, if you go alternate energy, you get a big tax credit. We have to maximize our energy efficiency. We're doing that. President Obama wants to raise the automobile mileage to 50 some odd miles per gallon. We can do that. We have to do it. There is a cost. We have to do it. A lot of these other environmental issues are not that difficult to remediate. I've talked about sustainability. We can reduce our carbon footprint with solar, wind, geothermal. I love these little run-of-rivers. We're never going to build a giant Grand Coulee Dam. That has a huge environmental impact. But we can build these little run-of-rivers. 25 megawatts will probably run New Canaan. Geothermal, I've done a lot of work in geothermal, and that's cool. It's a matter of scale. And globally, wind energy is rapidly coming down and approaching the cost of other forms of energy. It helps to have the tax credit, but it's a matter of scale, and this is huge, as is the solar. And as we build more, the price comes down, the technology improves. I am really intrigued by tidal energy. We need to do more of this. The Bay of Fundy has a problem in that there's so many logs in it. When they put these things up, the logs come cruising down at 10 knots and boom, smash them. Nuclear is okay. Everybody is scared about it, but it is green. We have to get a repository for the waste done. And this is coal. I've done a lot of work in coal. We have lots of coal in America, but the way we should use it is turn the coal into syn fuels, turn it into liquid petroleum, so we're not importing it from the Middle East, but capture all the CO2 that goes up the smokestack. There is a cost, but the business model has to change. We have to pay more for our energy. The other thing is, capturing carbon sequestration. It's expensive. We're working on it. Will it make a difference? We have to investigate that. I think I've shown you that there's no question that climate is changing, and it's a human influence that has just overwhelmed the natural forces. We'll get through it. Humans will survive. We're not going to become extinct. But an awful lot of the rest of the people in the world are going to suffer tremendously. What will it cost? There are two options. We can do nothing, and we can do something. If we do something, we're probably talking, over the next 25 years, spending trillions of dollars. Building more green energy sources, transitioning. We have trillions of dollars invested in the fossil fuel infrastructure. You just can't flick the switch off. You've got to make the transition. You have to pay to make that stuff more efficient and produce less. We have to deal with sea level rise. If we didn't put anything in the atmosphere going forward, the sea is rising. You can't, it's going to take 100 years just to reach equilibrium again. We have to deal with that. And if you live along the coast now, you know what FEMA's done to your insurance. So the do nothing scenario is frankly going to be catastrophic. You know, there are several billion people, and the world's major cities are at sea level. We know that when CO2 levels were 400 parts per million, you know, 2.5 to 5 million years ago, you had 10 to 20 meters of sea level rise. We're at that point now. It takes a while to catch up, but New Canaan will be waterfront property. That's going to be very expensive. And you know, 25 meters, by the end of this century, it's probably a meter. But even a meter in New York City is going to be very, very serious. So how do you move these people? How do we deal with fisheries as a function of ocean acidification? Just as an example, you know, Katrina was $150 billion. Sandy, just New York, New Jersey, was $40 billion. Yet they're rebuilding in the same place. Politicians don't have the guts to deal with this. So there has to be a public will. It's painful, but I'm telling you, the pain of not doing anything is going to be absolutely devastating for our children, our grandchildren, and it will also affect us. And that's another thing. Food, we can grow all the food we need. The issue is fertilizers, water, pesticides. You know, we have to manage. There's plenty of water. We can do desalinization. I just read in the New York Times that the Chinese there's a drought up in the Beijing area, and of course there are other problems up there with smog and pollutants, but they're going to spend nearly $3 billion building a very, very large desalinization plant and a pipeline, you know, hundreds of miles from the coast to Beijing. So it can be done. We know that we can clean up the rivers. When many of us were kids, you didn't want to go near the Hudson. The Hudson's clean. I remember the Naugatuck River. I went on a geological field trip on the Naugatuck River, and the rocks were slimy and disgusting. Now it's cleaned up, and there's a trout fishery there. So if we have the will, we can make a difference. The forest can be replanted. We don't need to clear cut everything. Or if we do clear cut, we plant it with multiple varieties of trees, not a monoculture. The mining scars can be restored. You know, we need the stuff that comes out of the ground, but we have to be more careful when we take it out of the ground. Recycling. I can't believe that in this country, there are many states that absolutely refuse to recycle. Oh, it costs too much, it costs too much, it's a pain in the neck. We have to do it. And it's amazing here in New Canaan, you know, on Monday when they pick up my trash, oh my goodness, where did this used to go before? When all the wine bottles and the plastic milk bottles and everything else, it's horrendous. There's a business there. Which model? Which business model do you want? This is in China. They just throw the trash in the stream. This is in Denmark. They burn the trash. In fact, Denmark is now importing the trash from the rest of Europe to fuel their power plants. And they get paid to take the trash, and then they sell the electricity back. And India's doing that too. Great idea. The fisheries, we're at a tipping point. But we can rescue the fisheries. And now I read recently that more than half the salmon sold is now fished. But you know, that has its problems too with the antibiotics. We need to work on efficient public transportation and not choke ourselves to death, you know, on the highways. So let me end here. I've been rambling for a long time, but I hope that you've learned something here. I think I've shown you that the planet Earth, it's always changed, but it's changing now at an accelerating rate. And this may have and will have a devastating impact on humanity. You know, here in New Canaan, we'll be fine. But what about the people in Bangladesh? You know, there's 50 million people that are going to have to move, and soon. We have a surging population. You know, what can we do with it? You know, ZPG would be great, but we're tripling in my lifetime 3 times. How do we deal with that? I'm also very concerned about the growing chasm between the haves and the have-nots. And I really, as a natural resource consumer, I really feel about that. So what is our duty as the global privileged class? And we are, when you consider our lifestyle. What is our duty to try to mitigate the impact of our lifestyle on the world? And, you know, we can make a difference if we have the will to do so. So what we have to do is we, the people, the media, our opinion moguls, and our elected leaders can no longer ignore the human factor in global change. The consequences of doing so are going to be catastrophic if we ignore what's happening. We have to reduce our carbon footprint, conserve energy, and natural resource sustainability matters a lot. So we can do this, I believe, in a way that will create jobs and boost the economy. You know, right now we're letting China build these technologies. You know, we are spending the money, but we're going to be importing the technologies that the Europeans are using. We can do this here. We need to have the will, and maybe it takes tax credits to do it. Making a difference starts right here in our community, and I think celebrating Earth Week in New Canaan is an excellent example of a way we can educate our population, our youth, in the importance of caring for the environment. But it starts in the community. And then let's make our voices heard in the State House, in our boardrooms, and in Washington. So I end here and entreat you all to become better stewards of this wonderful planet. So thank you. I'm happy to take any questions anyone would like. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing you didn't mention, how about the mudslides that happened a few weeks ago, and what is that a result of?
Of course, we've all followed the mudslides in California.
No, the ones out in Maryland, I think it was.
Oh, in Maryland. Washington State, yeah. There's been a lot of rain out there, and that's a function of you know, the Pacific currents moving north and bringing up the moisture, warm air. Lots of rain, and I guess that you know, I haven't studied the geology of the area, but the way a mudslide occurs like that is the ground reaches a saturation point, and the hydrostatic pressure exceeds the strength of the rock, and it gives way. And once it gives way, you know, it's massive. Momentum. It doesn't have to move very fast, but the mass is huge. So the formula for momentum is serious. I can't answer that any better. Yeah.
I'm wondering, in your, right from the beginning, you said the driving problem, of course, is that population growth.
Yep.
We can become more efficient in everything, but I'm just wondering, in all of the work you've done, you probably didn't get into that, but China for years has had a policy of discouraging population. How successful has that been? What can be done to change the paradigm? How can we control population growth? It's probably impossible, but are there any knowledge of what China's success? I know it's had downsides, but I'm wondering.
Well, you know, they had a one-child policy, and if you broke it, you went to jail. That's not America. So, you know.
It's not the rest of the world.
Yeah.
But,
Skip, to that,
Yeah.
just to what you're saying, it was successful. It did help reduce the population or stop it from growing. But one of the things that has happened as they have become more affluent, they're beginning in certain areas to drop the one-child policy. And for those that under that one-child policy, we were in China recently, we had a guy who actually, because they imposed and gave it to cousins. And the only reason why I bring it up is I was shocked that there were actually larger families. And the other thing that's happened in China, because of this boy-girl situation, girls are the lower in the population, and the boys are all looking, the girls have whatever they want. They look for the guy with deep pockets and a nice car.
No, there are a lot of other organizations over the past few decades that talked about zero population growth. It's something we need to deal with, obviously, but frankly, I think the Earth can probably support 9 billion people, but we have to educate the developing countries to do it properly, and it won't be done properly. And somebody said to me the other day, historically there were plagues. The plague in Europe wiped everybody out. Ebola could do it today, or wars. Rob?
Skip, this was somewhat pessimistic of a conversation in terms of what you've outlined for us, but the only thing that I can add to this is that the savings race is the generation behind me, my kids, and your kids, quite frankly, are much more in tune with these philosophies. And if there's a saving grace out there that I see, if there's a positive, that you can talk to us, and we're only going to be here for 30 or 40 more years, but there is a group coming up behind us that is far more conscientious of the consequences of this type of mentality. And I really do feel that there will be a greater effort and certainly much more sensitivity to this from the folks coming behind us than there was. I'm 50 years old. It just wasn't a real big part of my upbringing. It's a big part of our kids' upbringing. And I think the schools are a big help in that. I think we can be helpful in that. That could be a saving grace.
Absolutely. Earth Day is one of the ways to do that. Anybody else? Yeah.
Just one of the things I find particularly discouraging is the attitude in Washington, where you have a lot of senators who vote zero in terms of new environmental laws, and a reasonable percentage of senators don't believe in climate change. They might not even believe in evolution. And how are, unless we wait to Rob's point for a whole new generation to come in, do you have any particular thoughts on that?
Well, I tried, I was president of the American Geological Institute when we had the, 2012 elections. And I tried very hard to get energy policy and climate change on the agenda. Our Council of Scientific Society presidents, I actually met with Obama's Dr. Holdren, John Holdren, who's his science advisor. At the time, the political policy advisors said health care is tough enough. And the politicians did not want to take on controversial subjects like energy policy, carbon tax, and climate change. And I got that everywhere from senators, from congressmen. Oh, I am very supportive of it, but it's too divisive right now, and health care is going to be divisive enough. And that was the 2012 election. I'd like to do it now, and I am making efforts to give this talk to the Senate Energy Committee. So, yeah.
I just wanted to make a statement. I was in England, say, 15 years ago, visited my father, and they had all this showing the coast of England is shrinking, and because of the problem with it's already shrunk, the coast. But I would like to say that all those who love Downton Abbey and all these programs, the air then was utterly disgusting. During World War II, when I washed my hair, it came out black in the sink, and they have cleaned the air, they have cleaned the Thames, and if a little country can do that, I mean, you can fish in the Thames now, and it was filthy. And in Stratford on Avon, I remember going, and there was garbage coming down, but the air has definitely been cleaned, because now you can wash your hair there, and it doesn't come out black.
There was the will to do that. Like, we cleaned up the Hudson, we cleaned up in Cleveland, remember the river that caught fire? You know, we legislated environmental laws, and it worked. And now we have to convince the emerging countries that they must do this. You know, will they listen to us? Dick?
What happened to Al Gore is that he used to be very vociferous about this subject, and I don't hear anything from him anymore.
He had a swimming pool that used more energy than most towns. Yeah. I don't know where. Doug?
As an automotive enthusiast, I'd be curious to know your opinion of the latest technologies of the automotive manufacturers.
You know, I'd love to have an electric car, but I can't afford it. I support the mileage and, you know, the catalytic converter. Here's a statistic. I have another talk that I've been giving on the future of the global oil industry. And here's a statistic. 65% of the barrel of crude oil becomes transportation fuels. If we can increase our fleet mileage from, right now it's about 24 miles per gallon. If you could increase that to, say, 55, which Obama has set as a target, you are cutting our oil consumption down drastically. The price of oil is set by American demand. You know, we consume about 22 million barrels of oil a day and its products. So if we can take a big whack out of that, we reduce demand and the price comes down. Unfortunately, the rest of the world is buying cars. The Chinese bought more cars than Americans last year. So it's, you know, everybody has to have fuel-efficient automobiles. Yeah?
Well, haven't you just put your finger on part of the solution or part of the problem in that, in this country anyway, we constantly want to make energy cheaper when really, to achieve what we need to do, we need to make it more expensive, and therefore people will conserve it.
Yeah, and that is what you can do. And I have in my energy policy, if anyone's interested, I have this long thesis on energy policy that I was sending around in 2012. But a tax on fuels, a graduated tax, would reduce demand. But that money has to be used to improve public transportation and provide tax benefits. So if you want to put solar on your roof, you know, you can do that.
But in this, we haven't raised the federal tax on gasoline.
The gasoline tax.
In what, 40 years?
Yeah, it's the same as it was in the 50s. It's because there's just too much opposition from the producers. That's why they need to see this information about the impact of burning all this fuel. You know, the conservatives, and you know, I'm one. I'm a conservative Republican, but they don't represent me anymore. I'm really not that conservative. But I'm disappointed where you have people from Texas, like Mr. Cruz, you know, denying, and Rick Perry, you know, they don't believe. Perry doesn't believe in evolution, frankly. But you know, they call it junk science. They won't do anything. They think it's going to hurt the economy. Their heads in the sand.
Dumb down their education system so that.
Yeah, their heads in the sand, and I don't know how we deal with it. I try. I was able. It was interesting when we had what's called Congressional Visits Day, and you know, as just a regular civilian, you generally end up, when you go to see your congressman, you talk to a staffer. But I often got to talk to the congressman or the senator because I represented the nation's geologists, and it was really kind of cool to be able to do that.
Well, do you or your associates do these kind of deliveries out in the Great Flyover? Where
it's something. It starts with your Kiwanis Club, the Rotary Club, everybody, and I tell all my professional colleagues, and it's being done, go talk at your school. I used to talk when my sons were at Saks and the high school, I used to talk about geology and earth science then. But yes, those of us who care need to get out and talk in the community in an objective way. You know, yeah, last one, and we'll wrap it up because the staff is going to have to go.
I compliment you on the transition you've gone through, but and many of us have gone, when we were young and all our careers, we were kind of oblivious to what we were doing, our footprint, our waste, everything. We've matured and gotten more responsible. We've seen it. What do you, and I heard one person talk energetically about the youth, when you talk to the students, what are these young professionals going to go out there and do? What do you hear? I mean, are they truly aware, or are they going to be as oblivious when they need to build a family and take care of it?
I do a lot of mentoring at the professional society level, and I really enjoy that. And you know, we have at the national conventions a luncheon for students. It's free, so the students come and you'll sit at a table and it'll say, you know, government, industry, academia, and the kids come and talk. And I will say that 99% of the young people are with it on climate change and sustainability at the university and graduate school level. I have not met anybody under probably 40 who believes that climate change is a hoax and junk science. All right, well, thank you very much. And, yeah.